Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio, supporting Empower Women. And today we're talking about why men are so important in women's empowerment. I'm joined in the studio by my guest, Jeff Barth, Senior Director of MARC, which is Men Advocating Real Change, which is Catalyst's learning community for professional men who are committed to building inclusive workplaces. Jeff's responsible for the development, implementation and marketing of MARC's strategy and initiatives, all aimed at empowering individuals to become inclusive leaders and also powerful forces for change in the workplace. Before this, Jeff managed political campaigns for federal and local candidates. So quite a change. Welcome to the program, Jeff.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you. Appreciate the invitation.
You're welcome. So, Jeff, you've done so much already in your career. Tell me, what led you to choose this career path? And why the change from political campaigns to women's empowerment? Because it's quite different.
Yes, well, in many ways, it's actually it was a very easy segue. I've always been interested around gender equality. I, in fact, have 4 older sisters, if you can believe it. So right. Gender inclusion, yes, and 4 wonderful sisters that I deeply care about, and in my own life, just having watched them grow and develop and move into careers and start families, gender equality has always been something that I've been particularly close with, because I think of many aspects, notwithstanding the experiences that I have seen them encounter. And I believe that many men have had similar experiences to this when in the work that we do, oftentimes we hear from men that they reference the experiences of a spouse or a daughter or their own mothers. And my story is very similarly along those veins. So, and when I came into this work, in fact, when I started working with Catalyst, it was in public affairs, so very closely tied with some of my previous experience, and then I have moved over into this work specifically around MARC and how we work with men, and it's been quite I would say it's been an amazing experience for me to be part of.
Oh, wonderful. So tell us more about MARC, because I'm sure a lot of people haven't actually heard of it, and it's such a wonderful project. What way does this help empower women?
Well, so I would describe MARC as really a community of practice that re-envisions how men and women come together around partnership. I would say that the topic of gender equity in many ways is still challenging. It's something that I think society at large is thinking more and more about, which on the one hand is surprising because we've been talking about this for so long, right? But there is ample opportunity, and we see evidence of this on a day in and day out basis. And this community really brings men and women together to, I would say, a new level of collaboration. And it's, and I think part of what we sometimes overlook around the conversation of gender equity is men's role in this. In fact, when we're looking at equality on this topic, we hear the word gender, and in fact, we think specifically of women.
Yes.
The word gender becomes synonymous with women, and we forget that men also have a gender, and that and that they have a role in this conversation. They have an equal stake in this conversation. Yeah. And we work with many types of organizations, both nonprofits and individuals, but primarily businesses and oftentimes large corporations. And what we frequently see is that when we talk about gender equity, it's usually done from a lens that doesn't include men. And a lot of men, frankly, have not felt like they've been invited into the conversation, which again might be surprising for some people to hear. But when you think about historically of how we approach the topic of gender inclusion, well, it's led by women, it's diagnosed by women, it's treated and redirected, and so that means, well, at what point do men come into this conversation to help co-lead the effort? And MARC helps to recenter that effort.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because if you don't have both sexes working together, you're just not going to get anywhere, or else it's going to end up in discrimination the other way. So it's not going to get a happy result at the end of it. So I think it's very, very important, and I'm delighted that MARC exists, and I wish more people knew about it and took that view on how important it is on men and women talking together to get a good result. But I've got another question. I've got another question for you, which is slightly a confusing one. I've met many men who support gender equality when you talk to them on their own and really strongly support it, but then completely disappear into the woodwork when they're in a professional group environment. Do you think I'm right? And why do you think this is? And do you think it's something to do with individual resistance compared to collective resistance, or something like that?
Well, there's a lot of layers here that we could unpack, and you're asking a very important question. But what I would say is there are so many men who are supportive of this conversation, and it's important to showcase that and recognize with the work that I get to do with MARC. We actually, part of what we do, in addition to this virtual community, we travel around, frankly, all over the globe, talking about this conversation with different groups of men and women. And there are so many passionate, well-spoken leaders who are men who are leading this effort. But I will just say that given the history, again, of how we talk about gender equity, we have, I would say, unwittingly trained men to pause and wait before stepping up to participate. And this is an interesting situation, because for men, when we come into the room to be supportive, we're not necessarily sure what we're stepping into. We don't want to be seen as the problem, right? We want to be seen as individuals who are supportive, who are collaborating, but we're not necessarily sure how, frankly, to be co-leading the effort. And so we have very much trained men to pause. This is something that women have been thinking about their entire lives. And so men often feel that they don't have the experience, they don't have a point of reference. They're uncertain also, to your point of how some of their peers may react. And so these are all things that we should be thinking of. But the good news is that with our work with MARC, we've seen very large organizations just make tremendous inroads in terms of pulling men and women together in a way that is very, very efficient.
Yeah, that's very good news to hear. And I've now got a very controversial question for you. I was interviewing a lovely lady the other day, Pamela Meeking-Stewart. She's the New Zealand film and television producer who's very well known for her award-winning documentary series, Pioneer Women. So she is really very, very supportive on women and feminism and things like that. And she told me that she felt that our age group, so the boomer age group, had an advantage over women today, because at that time, men just didn't expect women to challenge them and to take them on to get to the top or to fight so hard for equality. Whereas now, men are more aware and more defensive. So potentially there's more barriers for women than there were 30 or 40 years ago. What do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, perhaps that is a difficult question, but I would just say, sometimes again, with the way that news is frankly circulated and sold and encouraged through clicks, and what I often see in this space is that we hyper focus on instances that are derailing the conversation, which is important because we need to understand where opportunity remains. And I would say the short answer here is the job is certainly not done. But again, in the work that I've done, I've seen leaders of all age groups, from baby boomers to millennials, step forward and be very, very clear, outspoken advocates in this space. So, and I think it's, to your point, I think it's critically important that we recognize that a lot of these leaders exist. Yep. So while there may be instances that seem to be slowing the conversation, and it is important to give that concern and thought and to make sure that we respond appropriately, we should also recognize that many men don't need that intervention, so to speak, that many are participating or on the cusp and ready to go. And we should focus energy also on those individuals.
Yeah. Okay. So through your work with Catalyst and with MARC, what progress do you think's been made in women's empowerment and inclusion over the last 10, 15 or even 20 years? And what direction do you think it will go in the future?
Well, the fact that MARC even exists, I think, is a sign of tremendous success. Again, I would say, yes, we've had success and there's more to be done, but we're entering this new world of collaboration that is incredibly encouraging. And both men and women should be excited by this. This is about true equality, about recognizing that gains for women are also gains for men. These are all tremendous successes. And we're talking about this from an angle that 10 or 15 years ago, it was pretty few and far between. I would also just say, though, that the topic in terms of how we're pulling men into this conversation and men's role is still somewhat uncharted territory. So there is ample opportunity to discover what is ahead and what is in store. And I think it presents itself as, frankly, an opportunity for, to be frank, forward-thinking companies to help lead the effort. And a lot of, in terms of leadership in this space that I am seeing, are coming from business, are coming from corporations.
Yes.
And they are setting a standard of behavior that they expect culturally within their businesses, and that will have a spillover effect.
Yes.
Far and wide into economies.
Yeah. Now, I know there's a couple of CEOs that I work with who, and they're definitely boomer age group, but they totally believe that having women at the top and level pegging all the way through helps their business and helps growth. And they actively try and encourage the men in their companies to be more open-minded and to give input and to work together, because they've had the experience of all the benefits. So it's great to see that. And I appreciate seeing it from my age group, the boomers, that, you know, they've got that vision that they can see the benefits to it. So right. I know you work with a lot of different regions, and by regions I mean different countries, different nationalities, and also a lot of different markets, as in industrial markets, economic markets, things like that. What do you think the different regions and markets can learn from and also teach each other? Because there's a vast difference between places like, I don't know, the Nordic countries, and maybe some of the very, very old traditional countries that are still not into equality and women and things like that. So what do you think we can all learn from each other?
Yeah, such a great question. So I think one bright spot here comes from the technology industry in particular. And the reason why I bring this up is because it seems to me that sometimes there's a different method of risk or acceptance of risk or how to move forward cutting edge in technology. And we have seen a lot of companies vying to be first out the gate in trying to get this right. I think one amazing example of this, in fact, is the company Dell. We started working with them about 3 years ago. They were one of the first adopters of our MARC initiative, and it has had far-reaching impact within their own company culture, largely in Western Europe, but there's been spillover effect, I would say, elsewhere. And one of the things that they have done that is incredibly encouraging is they have, through their reach in technology, they have had various events and a series of in-person and virtual meetings where they've invited in the technology community. And we have seen just profound interest, I would say, in Europe as a result of Dell helping to lead this effort. So I think that's one example of how companies can really help set the stage. We've seen also this happen with an organization by the name of Northrop Grumman. For those of you who aren't familiar, they work in defense, and in particular here in the United States, they have helped lead this from within their industry, but it has had spillover effect with it across corporate sectors as a result of key leadership getting involved. So it really does present itself. So when I say that this is almost uncharted territory in terms of how we execute, this is really what I'm referencing. And because there is so much excitement and buzz in this space, people are curious and they're hungry to learn more, and we see that, and we get to see that firsthand.
Oh, that's great. It's great to hear that. I mean, particularly if they start looking at each other and trying to go one step further. That's wonderful.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
So can you tell me, this is going more onto the goals of business leaders. How can business leaders bring more sustainable goals into their corporations and the local environment and everyday life, but particularly regarding diversity and inclusion? How do you think, what would you recommend?
Yeah, again, that's a really important question. Because of how new this topic is, we sometimes see companies 12 or 18 months down the path and they realize that they haven't measured this to the extent that they want. But what I would say is that when it comes to change behavior and really tapping into cultural shift, one of the things that we like to advise our clients is that what gets measured gets done. So we can't afford to forget this very important piece, and it's hard to really fully understand success unless we're willing to push pause to recognize what we've accomplished. And we try very hard to provide some of those metrics that are going to support organizations in understanding where they're making progress. The other thing too, though, that I would just say is that there's a lot of stake here to your earlier point for the business, and there is ample opportunity to tie that into performance for leadership. I know that different companies have different cultures of acceptance in terms of accountability, but there's good ways for organizations to add that individual leadership accountability around inclusion, around gender equity into performance. So whether that's around promotion or salary increases or bonuses, a lot of companies are doing some risky things with this, but as a result, they also get to enjoy some of those benefits that we're all trying to reach for.
Yeah. And I know, I mean, we hear a lot about breaking the glass ceiling, and it seems to be that every woman's ideal is to have a seat on the board or something like that. But in my view, mindfulness and fulfillment are really important factors in life, but also in business and sustainability. And I think that fulfillment is really the only valid way of measuring success, far more than material things or turnover or business results. And this is one of the things that also seems to get lost when we talk about inclusion and gender balance and diversity, because many people seem to measure success in that field and inequality just by the percentages of men against women on the board. So do you think these factors are as important in the inclusion and equality battle? And why do you think so much the idea of being on the board tends to take priority over fulfillment as a measurement that's used in success?
Yeah, well, you raised such an intriguing point. I don't know that I have the full answer to this, but I can tell you this is almost sort of a chicken or the egg conversation of what comes first. I would say organizations cannot forget about the business case. They can't forget about their numbers. They need to be hyper focused on demographics within their organization. This includes board leadership to down through middle management and who they're attracting and retaining and promoting. But to your point of fulfillment and personal participation with this, you know, it's interesting because when we look at the motivators that seem to frankly pull men into the conversation, it's not exactly what you would expect. So MARC, as you referenced at the beginning of this call, is an initiative of Catalyst, which is fundamentally among many other things, a research organization, and we have decades of research of gender equity and patterns of behavior for success. And one of the things that we've learned around the conversation of engaging men is that we can help support a conversation to identify who within an organization is likely, which men are likely going to be the advocates, the champions, the leaders for change. We can help support that discovery. And the tipping point here might be surprising. It's that the men who are actively engaged most likely have this personal sense of social justice or fair play. And so by that, I mean an understanding of the status quo, what it may feel like to be part of it or not. Maybe they've had their own instances where they didn't fit the mold, where they didn't fit that quote man box, but they understand what it feels like to be part of the acceptance or not. And that is a key motivator. So what it tells us is that individuals who are leading this effort, there's a deep personal fulfillment to participation. So while it's important that we pay attention to board percents, we need to recognize that individuals are leading because they personally care. There is a personal satisfaction when they participate.
Yeah. And I know to have more inclusive leadership in companies, in corporations, in all types of organization, there's a lot of challenges around it. But also, I think it's important to think about the balance and understanding of this into our careers, because not everybody knows, not everybody understands the responsibilities or how you have to go about something, whether they're men or women. You know, anything to do with leadership and having any kind of balance in business, it can be complicated if you don't have the experience. So how do you think that we can bring more balance and understanding of these challenges into our careers, particularly regarding inclusive leadership? And what can companies and organizations do to facilitate this and to encourage employees so that they think more about the ways that they can help each other and make the future more inclusive for everybody?
Yeah, well, you know, so one of the ways that we try to do this is within our MARC community for both men and women. We challenge, part of our mantra, frankly, is we want our members to see themselves as role models. They don't always have to get it right, but we want them to be willing to step forward and to be doing something. And I would say what is often missing in this conversation are the visible role models who are being risky, understanding that they may not always say the right thing, but there is positive intent there, that they are trying, that they're putting it forward. And I think businesses have a responsibility to recognize both the men and women that are able to do this. And there's many great ways that organizations can help showcase the individuals who have this level of curiosity, from hosting panel conversations